Welcome back to my channel for an episode which gives you tips and tricks about the new Hasselblad X2D Mark II, which I've not yet shown in other tutorials or in my quick tip videos. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, like my videos. If you like them, of course, only share my videos. And in this way, support my work and help me to increase the reach of my channel. Many thanks for that. All right, a quick housekeeping statement first. I've already posted a couple of quick tip videos where I just did shoot out to my channel a quick tip for you guys if you are a Hasselblad X2D Mark II shooter. And I also posted recently a longer tutorial on how to customize all the mechanical elements on the camera body. That includes all the buttons, control wheels and lens control wheels if they are available, like here, where you can assign a function in the menu. And I will not repeat what I said in these videos. The tips and tricks I will provide in this video are not yet mentioned on my channel. But for your convenience, everything I posted before in terms of quick tips and, things you can actually customize, all of that, I will post all the links down below in the info box. So if there is an information which interests you, you can go to the video on my channel and look it up. The first tip I want to show you is how to quickly focus in a 100% reliable way on infinity or at the minimum focusing distance. And for this, we tap the display toggler here. And I go here to the representation where we actually have here the distance scale. And you see it here, it always shows the minimum focusing distance of the lens and then infinity, which is the far horizon. If I want to focus very quickly at infinity, let me first focus on Jennifer here. That's Jennifer. You see on the distance scale, we are now pretty much between 0.6 and 1.1 meter. If I now want to focus quickly at infinity, I just tap and hold the infinity symbol on the distance scale. Watch this. You saw focus updating. The focus indicator here switched exactly to the middle of the infinity symbol, which also turned green. So this is the way to find infinity focus. Let's do this again. And now let's tap and hold. Focus updates. The distance indicator on the distance scale moves exactly symmetrically to the middle of the infinity symbol and it's green. The same works for the minimum focusing distance. Let me show you with my left-hand side thumb. Tap and hold the minimum focusing distance on the scale here, 0.3. Focus updates. The indicator is actually in light speed going to the left-hand side of the distance scale, and 0.3 meter, which is the minimum focusing distance for this lens, is green. Simple like that. Let's focus somewhere on the background. Let's do this again. 0.3, boom, green, and minimum focus distance is there. Why is this useful? Because it's useful if you are shooting at night, for instance, you have this on a tripod, focusing becomes a bit tedious. And in particular, infinity focus for landscapes, cityscapes is what you will use most. In this way, you have it at your disposal, but most importantly, you know that the focus is sitting in the 100% correct position, namely at infinity. And you don't have to try around with focus peaking and everything. I think this is a quick access feature to one of the most common focusing settings in terms of distance I use on these type of cameras. And here it's implemented in an absolutely smooth and splendid way. In my case, the display representation I use most is actually this one. It's not the one where the distance scale is visible like here, as I showed you in tip number 1. So if I'm here and I want to still, without changing the display representation, access the minimum focusing distance or infinity focus, what can I do? That's what tip number 2 is about, because I will show you how to assign infinity focus and minimum focusing distance to a customizable function button. For demonstration purposes, I want to assign this function now to the push of the joystick. And how can we do that? I go into the menu, I go to General. On General, I go to Custom Buttons. And then I need to go from the front representation and the top representation to the rear side representation. And here I find the joystick click. And now if I tap on that, I can actually scroll here until I find focus infinity. I confirm this and now it is locked in. And now I don't have to go into this representation with the distance scale. I can stay where my workflow for me best works and can just push that button. And watch what happens. The focus will change. Let's now first focus on Jennifer. Focus field is green. And if I push now the joystick, Jennifer will become blurry and focus will switch to infinity, which I don't have in this room, but it will nevertheless enforce focus there. So let's push the joystick and watch how Jennifer gets blurry. Here you go. And now we have found infinity focus. We can, of course, check this now if we go to the distance scale. And you see here the indicator for where we focus is sitting symmetrically just below the infinity symbol. How cool is that? Let's do this again with the scale visible here. Jennifer, we are now between 0.6 and 1.1 meter. I push the joystick and it jumps right away to the infinity symbol, and the infinity symbol gets green in the same way as what I showed you before when you tap these two endpoints of the distance scale. Very nice. We can, of course, also do this now with the minimum focusing distance. Let's just get there again. Let's go here into the menu. Let's go to General. Let's go to Custom Buttons. Let's swipe until we come to the rear side representation. Here's the joystick click. And now we change this to focus minimum. Boom. And now if I focus at the horizon here, you see this is not infinity because my room is not infinitely long. But if I push now the joystick, it will send the indicator here on the distance scale right away to the minimum focusing distance, which is 0.3 meter. Watch it. And 0.3 meter gets green. So fully analogy to what you saw before by tap and hold is now assigned to a function button. And since we have a lot of buttons, if both functions are important for you, you can choose one dedicated button for each of these functions, minimum focus and infinity focus. Simple like that. Tip number 3 is about using the auto exposure lock button for balanced exposure. And the way I can demonstrate this best is if I go here into spot. So let me go here into spot metering and let me focus on Jennifer's body. By the way, you saw how the background became brighter because Jennifer's body is very dark. So the camera thinks, metering exactly on Jennifer's body the light, that it needs to brighten up the scene. And now there is always, if you have your pointing finger on the shutter button and you half press it down, 2 metering processes take place at the same time. One is exposure metering, and that's now happening via spot on Jennifer's body. And the second metering process is measuring the focus so that we have focus sitting on Jennifer's body. So these 2 processes happen simultaneously by half pressing the shutter button. And when the focus field is green and confirmed, I can take the shot. Simple like that. Now, since light metering happens on Jennifer's dark body, the background is very bright. And maybe I don't like that, but I also want to focus on Jennifer's body. So how do I solve that dilemma that the focus field needs to sit on Jennifer's body because I want her to be sharp and in focus, but I don't want to meter light at Jennifer's body? Well, then you can separate the light metering from the focus metering by auto exposure lock. So how do we do that? Watch what happens if I turn the camera a little bit to a less dark area. Let's say to the red color in the watch. You see how the scene becomes darker, and going back to Jennifer's dark body, it becomes brighter. In order to demonstrate to you the function of auto exposure lock, I've now placed a light source here in the left-hand side area of the frame. And the contrast now between that light source and Jennifer's body is super high. The light source is super bright. Jennifer's body is really dark. And let me now show you how to do this separation. And first of all, I can now focus and simultaneously meter light on Jennifer's body. And then I have this bright background, which I don't like. So let's meter light in a different area of the scene. Let's go here and darken this up a little bit by interpolating, but using that light source already. And let's now here meter light and push the AEL button. Here you see now a symbol appeared on the screen, auto exposure lock. And you see if I now go back with my focus field to Jennifer, the background is no longer bright. But now I have pressed the shutter button. Exposure stays as it was before. Also, it flickered shortly, and I focus on Jennifer's body and take the shot. And let's now basically do this in the normal way. Focus and light metering simultaneously on Jennifer's body. And look at the difference. Here the image where I separated light metering from focusing, and here the image where it happens simultaneously on Jennifer's dark body. That's the way how you can separate light metering from focus for a more balanced exposure. Tip number 4 again is about separation. And in tip number 3, we separated light metering from focus metering by using the auto exposure lock or AEL button. Now we have here AFD, and that stands for autofocus drive. And with this, I can do another separation, namely I can separate the focusing process from the point in time where I release the shutter and take the photo. Let's have a look. If I press and hold AFD and my pointing finger is here, I do not have it on the shutter release button. So if I press and hold it, the focus field will turn green and Jennifer will be sharp and in focus. Watch. Here we go. And now I have no longer the risk, in particular if I use AFD for focus tracking in autofocus continuous, that I accidentally take a photo I don't want. The moment in time I want to take the photo, I put my pointing finger on the shutter release button and just press it down. And it will take immediately the photo. And since I pre-focused via autofocus drive, Jennifer should be sharp and in focus. Let's check this. Here she is, Jennifer, in all her beauty, crisp and sharp. Very nice. That's the way it works. Tip number 5 is about using the AFD button not only to prevent unwanted shots and taking photos, but also for image recomposition and recomposing a scene. And the way to do this is you press and hold AFD, Jennifer is sharp and in focus, and now I recompose and place her no longer at the center of the frame, but somewhere else. And I can, as long as I hold this AFD button, Jennifer will still be in focus. So I can take the shot now. And if we look into that, Jennifer should still be sharp and in focus. And she is. Look at her. Very nice. And in this way, you can also use, and that's tip number 5, the AFD button for recomposing a scene and keeping the focus on the subject where you originally had it when you started the focusing and light metering process. Very simple and very convenient. Of course, you can also do this by half pressing the shutter button. Just to be complete here in my presentation, half pressing the shutter button, recomposing the scene, and Jennifer should still be in focus and sharp as long as I do not take my pointing finger off the shutter release button. Let's check this out. This also works, you see? So you have two ways to do this. You can always use the shutter release button, but you can also use AFD. And I find this personally much more convenient. That's why a lot of people love back button focus, because you don't even touch your shutter release button. You just can recompose whatever you want, let's say this way here, and then you take the shot if you are happy with your scene. Let's go here. Here she is, sharp and in focus. Tip number 6 concerns metering. And for ages, as long as I can think, Hasselblad in the metering options has the following. We have center weighted, we have spot, and we have center spot. And there is now matrix metering like you have it in other modern cameras, where the camera in an intelligent way figures out the best exposure for the lighting in the room. But that changed now. And it only changes if you activate one more feature here, namely HDR. So let's go into quality. And in quality, we actually have now activated here RAW and HIF or HEIF, however you want to pronounce that. And if I activate now HDR, all metering options will vanish and just one will stay. And I'm showing you that symbol now. If we go here back and we go here, you see this is now intelligent metering. Smart metering, I think, is what Hasselblad calls it in the menu. And it's deactivated. You can no longer go for any other metering. And the reason very likely is that with HDR enabled for HEIF images, the camera actually figures out a way to get more information in shadows and in highlights. And that is something which requires a more sophisticated metering method. And since that metering also applies to your RAW files, you have access now to a fourth metering method, which deviates from the standard 3 I showed you before. And let's take an image now here with this metering method. Let's take this one. Let's deactivate HDR. Let's go back here under quality. Let's deactivate it. And now let's go to one of the other metering methods here. It did fall back to the one I had before, center spot. Let's take the image Let's quickly look at that. This is without HDR and without that smart metering activated. And this is with smart metering. And you see there is a difference in the bright areas. And there is actually something magic going on, which you can later use to have this representation here, where it says HDR, sorry, here, HDR in the upper right-hand side corner, to display it with more information, more rich in shadows and in highlights on an HDR compatible display. And that metering method you can only access, if I go back here, you see it's the usual three suspects here. I can only access this if I activate HDR under quality, and then it goes automatically into that smart metering here, indicated by that symbol or icon. Tip number 7 is about auto ISO, and Hasselblad on the X2D Mark II finally gave us a setting which was not available for a long time on the X2D and its predecessors. And let me quickly demonstrate you. So this is my X2D, still in really good condition, I should say. No lens mounted. I don't need it for my demonstration. Let's go into ISO here and let's activate auto ISO. Here we go. I'm currently in aperture priority here. And if I switch into manual, this auto ISO falls back to ISO 100, and if I tap the button, there is no auto ISO setting available any longer. If I go back into aperture priority or shutter speed priority, let's do it this time with shutter speed priority, no lens detected. Yes, I know, I'm not stupid. And then we have auto ISO available. Let's go back into fully manual mode, and you see it falls back to an ISO of 100, and the option is no longer there. I cannot select it. This has finally, after all those user feedbacks, solved by Hasselblad. Let me show you, and it's perfect that it goes, because for me it's a standard application. In manual mode, I want to control aperture and shutter speed myself. Don't leave it to the camera, but I very often do not care about ISO, because even at high ISO values, I will get really good footage based on the excellent sensor I have in the X2D and the X2D Mark II. So let's go here. We are currently in aperture priority. You see this, I'm in auto ISO. If I tap ISO, you see auto is activated here. If I now go back into fully manual mode, here, you see auto ISO is still available, and it's also in the menu here. So I can select it for fully manual shooting. Hasselblad, it took you a long time to listen to photographers who told you that this is a no-go, that we don't have it. Now here on this camera, finally it's here, and I fully appreciate it. Tip number 8 is about display representations. And you saw it repeatedly at the beginning of the video that I switched information overlays on the display by this button here, which by the way cannot be customized. So currently I'm in the shooting mode where I typically start, and now I switch to a histogram representation. Here I switch to the grid view. Here I switch to the distance scale. And here I switch to the level gauge where I can level meter my camera. Then I switch to a screen where I have no information at all, just the autofocus field. And then I'm back in my normal shooting mode here. Now, what if you want to have not separated screens for all these informations, these image overlays here, but you want to combine some of them in one tailor-made screen, one tailor-made display representation for your shooting habits? And you can actually customize this in the menu, and I think it's nicely implemented and nicely done. The way you do this is by overlays over your live view here, and you can actually tweak this in the menu. And let's quickly go through that again. We have here exposure info, then exposure info plus histogram, then exposure info plus grid, exposure info plus distance scale, and exposure info plus spirit level. And then we have the non-screen where nothing is there but the autofocus field. And now let's go into the menu. Let's go into general here. And in general, let's go to custom overlays. And here you find now these screens where I just toggled through. Exposure info, then the histogram joints, then the grid joints, then the distance scale comes on top of it, the spirit level, and all of that. Now there is a section here which says combined. And in combined, I can actually choose what I want to have here. Let's say I want to have exposure info, I want to have the grid, and I want to have the distance scale. So I activate these, and now I have combined information. Before, it was always First of all, exposure only, then exposure plus some additional information like a histogram, a grid, a distance scale, a spirit level, or nothing at all. Here now, I selected exposure info plus 2 additional informations, the grid and a distance scale. And that I can now activate here under combined. So it should come just before the screen where nothing is there, but only the autofocus field. Let's check again under combined that we have this correct. Yes, let's go into live view. And in live view now, I toggle here, and this is exposure info. This is exposure plus histogram. This is exposure plus grid, exposure plus distance scale, exposure plus level meter. And now we have a combined view. And in the combined view, we have now here the distance scale, the grid, and the exposure information in exactly the way I checkboxed this here in the menu. If we go back here and we go to combined, you see I can make a tailor-made screen where more than one information comes on top of exposure information. In this case, the grid and the distance scale. I can also have them all, you know, if you're obsessed by information, then go to the histogram and the spirit level. It will be a very messy screen, I'm sure. Let's check this again. If it took it over, sometimes it loses a checkbox if I'm not confirming perfectly. Now everything is there. Let's go back. We've already been on that display representation. And now you see we have exposure info. That's always the basic info we need, plus 4 additional informations: distance scale, level gauge, histogram, and grid. Exactly in the way I activated it in the menu under General and Custom Overlays. I don't need that. I'm fine with always exposure info plus 1 additional info, but some people might want to use that for their workflow. And here is where you can customize it. Tip number 9 is the following. This camera has significant power consumption. And by the way, as a side remark, if you have the camera switched off, let's quickly do this. You can always check how much battery you have left over by quickly tapping the on-off switch. So if you tap this, you see here 46%. So far what I did in this tutorial, the battery was fully charged before, consumed already more than half its capacity. Let's switch it on again. And one way to save battery is if you're not shooting remotely via Focus Mobile 2 and you don't want to transfer images to another device, go into flight mode, which is called airplane mode here on the Hasselblad camera. And I show you this is under connection. And I have this on as a standard. I always have airplane mode on as long as I don't need a connection to Focus Mobile 2, which is in most of the situations the case. I do not shoot wirelessly connected with that camera very often, only from time to time. So airplane mode is a standard, will help you to save some energy and to reduce your power consumption on the camera for a battery that is anyway not super strong. Tip number 10 is also about power consumption and saving energy and extending the life of a fully loaded, fully charged battery. And the strongest consumers of power and energy when it comes to the battery in this camera is actually the electronic viewfinder and the LCD display. And you can decide whether you want to go with an auto mode where it switches between the two, or whether you want to only shoot with the LCD or only with the electronic viewfinder. And that, by the way, you do here under display. And you see here, you can say auto, rear screen only, or EVF only. I have this typically on auto. But there is a smart way how you can basically switch off both the EVF and the display simultaneously to save battery life. And that is something which I don't think is super obvious, is a little bit hidden, because it comes with button customization. And let me show you that. Let's say I want to have the joystick again, where I can customize what happens if I push it to switch off both the electronic viewfinder and the LCD. And the way to do this is I go here into General, then I go into Custom Buttons, and I swipe here to the rear side of the camera. I could take here the rear wheel click or the rear custom button, whatever it is. I take the joystick click again, and then if you go here and scroll, you find display off. And that is a convenient setting which is a little bit hidden. I don't even know if this is documented somewhere, but if you select it and you go here, Now my LCD is activated and my EVF is activated. Let me try to get close to the camera if you can see this. You see, the EVF is activated. If I now press the joystick, both will switch off immediately. Boom. Let me show you. Now it's dark inside. You see? No more screen visible in the EVF. And that is convenient, in particular, if you want to wake up the camera quickly by half pressing the shutter button, but have to walk a few blocks, for instance, in a large city before you want to take the next shot. You just push the joystick or any other customized button for that function, and both the EVF and the LCD, which are the largest consumers of energy of the battery in this camera, will be deactivated and you save power. If you want to wake it up again, just push the shutter release button halfway and then you're back into shooting mode, and also the EVF is alive again. You see it here, is again alive. And then you can deactivate it, you will save power and reduce power consumption. And when you want to shoot again, after you walked for 15 minutes or what have you, you just activate it again by half pressing the shutter button. Tip number 11 is about manual focus. And the standard way, I'm currently in autofocus single here. I can focus on Jennifer. And the standard way, which a lot of people will apply if they want to go in manual focus, they pull the ring here. So you get the scales here and you can manually focus. Let's have a look here. I have focus peaking activated. Here we go. Now it's autofocus, then focus peaking kicks in and so on. But here, if you pull that ring and make the scale underlying visible, you lose an important feature. And that feature is that you can still use autofocus drive to find quicker focus even in manual focusing. Let me show you. If I now press autofocus drive, it says autofocus blocked by focus ring in MF position. And that's this position here. Have a look again. I cannot use autofocus drive. In order to use it, I need to push this back and then go into manual mode via the menu. I go from autofocus single to manual focus. And now if I go back into live view, I can manually focus here. But if I'm far away, I also have AFD at my disposal. Look at that. Here we go. And now I can still fine tune if I want via the focus ring. If you go via this in the way many people will go, AFD will not operate. And that is tip number 11, which I think is important for you to know. If you don't have an urgent need to see these scales for distance and depth of field, leave that ring in as if you would shoot in autofocus mode. Go here manually to MF, and then you have both worlds. You have manual focus here and you have autofocus here on AFD. Look at that. A very nice tip, I think. Don't you agree? Tip number 12 is about manual white balance. And you have access directly in live view to that. Here is a symbol and it's currently on auto white balance. And I use now the rear control wheel to cycle through the options. And at the very last option, I actually get a little arrow on the right-hand side of manual white balance. And I can now use the joystick to actually come into this representation. And with the rear control wheel, I can now steer my temperature. And this is also updating in live view here. Let me show you. I can really scroll here around. And on the right-hand side, I have my tint, which I can steer with the front control wheel. You see here, I can really steer this here. And this is very convenient because you have access directly in live view to this. And in this way can set up your temperature and your tint in a very quick way. Just going into live view, having it set on manual white balance, using the joystick to go to the right-hand side, following that arrow direction here. And then you can use the rear control wheel and the front control wheel to steer your temperature and tint. Nicely implemented. Tip number 13 is also a white balance tip and takes it to the next level. You saw here how to activate the manual white balance, and by going with the joystick to the right hand side, you can use the two control wheels here to control temperature and tint. Now you can also go here into your control screen, tap here, and then you have one more option, and that's the picker. And the picker will typically load the last image saved on the Compact Flash Express Type B or the internal storage. And then I can move here this white balance picker and can measure in the frame, which is stored as a raw image, the temperature and the tint. I can move it with my finger, and I can also move it with the joystick. And let's go here. And if I want to measure here, I just confirm, and then you see that this is updated to the values we have here. And you see this is now at almost 4,500 Kelvin and the tint is -16. Let's do this in some other area so you see how this works. Let's measure it here on the table. For instance, I confirm, and then I have new values here in the picker selected. And you see them also in live view. If you go to manual white balance and use the joystick again to the right hand side, you see what has been logged in here. 3014 on temperature in terms of Kelvin and -25 on tint. And if I want to have this a bit warmer, I can go here, go to the picker and move my picker here. Let's do it with the finger this time up here. The area where it's measured is the rectangle inside the circle. And now I confirm. And now my scene is warmer. And here in the M white balance setting, you see that I actually have now 5,408 in terms of Kelvin temperature and -4 as a tint. And that is sometimes very convenient. You can also take an image, a raw image, of course, of a gray card and carry it with you. And in this way, adjust the white balance always to your liking. Tip number 14 concerns shutter speed and electronic shutter. And I'm now in fully manual mode here. And if you want to have a look here, I can make my shutter speed only as fast as 1/2000 seconds with this lens here, the X2D II, which by the way also is then my flash sync speed here. And I cannot go faster. And if I want to go faster, I need to go into electronic shutter, and that's under exposure. And there is no hybrid shutter option here like in many other cameras, like in the Sony world or the Leica world or the Nikon world. And hybrid would mean that up to 1/2000 seconds, the camera goes for mechanical shutter. And if you want to go faster, it automatically deactivates mechanical shutter, which in this case here is a leaf shutter in the lens, of course, and switches to electronic shutter. Here you have to activate it. And it says here in this option, the camera will disable the lens shutter and use an electronic shutter. So let's do this. And now if I go back here, you see I can go now significantly faster as 1/6000 seconds. If I dial this in here and switch back to mechanical shutter, it will automatically correct back to 1/2000 seconds. Have a look. Here we go. And now it's 1/2000 seconds. So that's the way you can go faster than what you can do with your mechanical shutter. It comes at a cost and expense. And I hardly use electronic shutter because there are rolling shutter effects if you have moving or fast moving subjects in the scene. The readout time of the sensor is not quick enough, and there are not many cameras where the readout time is so quick that you actually don't see any rolling shutter effects if you have moving subjects in the scene. The Sony Alpha 1 Mark II is a good example of a sensor which is so fast that you can shoot always with electronic shutter if you want. Or let's take the Nikon C9 or the Nikon C8. Their readout time of the sensor is fast enough and their processing inside the camera fast enough to allow you to go for electronic shutter. And the Nikon C9 has only electronic shutter. So by definition, it needs to be very fast in terms of readout time. That doesn't apply to the Hasselblad X2D or X2D Mark II. It doesn't apply to the Fuji GFX100 RF or GFX100 Mark II. It does also not apply to the Leica cameras I'm aware of, because the readout time is not fast enough for guaranteeing you that you have no rolling shutter effects. That's why I hardly use electronic shutter on my X2D Mark II. But if you need it for faster shutter speeds, let's say you want to shoot widest open, and in this case, this would be an f2.5, and you have a very bright day, you will reach the limits very quickly. And then the only option actually is to go for electronic shutter. And if you have no moving subjects in the scene, it's also not a problem. Tip number 15 is again about using autofocus in manual focusing mode. And I showed before how to use autofocus drive, this button here, in manual focusing, as long as you have not pulled here the focus ring. to actually do autofocus in manual focus in order to get quicker close to your subject with the focus. And that works really good. But there is another method you can use, and that's touch autofocus when manually focusing. And the way to access this is the following. We go into the menu and it's actually under focus. And if I scroll down here, I find here a setting which says touch autofocus in manual focus. Let's activate it. And let's switch here. I'm currently still in autofocus single. You see, half pressing the shutter button focuses nicely on Jennifer's body. Let's go here into manual focusing. And now I can operate the focus ring. You see, it's with focus peaking that kicks in and all of that. And if Jennifer is out of focus, I can now touch and it will focus on Jennifer with the same effect as if I would have used the autofocus drive button here as I demonstrated earlier in the video. So very convenient. And let's tap and it finds focus on Jennifer's body. And then I can fine tune, of course, on the focus ring if I want. Now, in the same way as before, let's get Jennifer out of focus and let's pull out the lens ring here, the focus ring with the manual scale. Now this will no longer work. Have a look here. It's not working. I can focus out and it's not focusing on Jennifer if I touch the screen, because that ring here, whenever you see the scale, you know that autofocus is blocked on the lens and will not work. If I push this in, I'm still in the same manual mode. Let's get Jennifer out of focus. Let's tap here. And then it gets her body nice and clear in focus, and I can fine tune with the focus ring if I want. That's the way it works. Tip number 16 concerns in-body image stabilization of the X2D Mark II, but when lenses are mounted, which are not from Hasselblad and not the XCD lineup. And I have one example where I want to demonstrate this. I have a NovaFlex adapter here that enables Leica-M lenses to be shot on a Hasselblad X camera. Let's get this out. Let's have a look how this looks like. This is the adapter. And here actually you go into the Hasselblad mount and here you mount the Leica-M lens. Very nice. And you also see it here, Hasselblad and Leica-M lenses. And I want to mount this with a Noctilux lens here. This is one of the older Noctilux lenses here. It's a beauty of a lens. It's a Noctilux M. Widest open is an f1.0, 50mm. It's a beautiful lens. And if you want to mount this on your Hasselblad X camera and want to nevertheless use the in-camera, in-body image stabilization of the sensor, then you need to dial in a certain setting, which I want to show you in a moment. So let's first assemble this, then let's look into the setting. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? A Noctilux M 50mm via the NovaFlex adapter mounted to my Hasselblad X2D Mark II. I think it looks pretty cool and pretty impressive. Now let's go through this in detail, what it means to create a workflow with that lens. First of all, the camera switches automatically in manual focusing mode because if I tap here, it says no lens detected. Since there are no electronic contacts between the third-party lens here from Leica and the camera body, and by the way, Leica-M lenses don't send any electronic signals at all, the camera doesn't detect the lens. And that means the crucial advantage of the X system, namely that we have a leaf shutter in the lens, is gone. There is basically no mechanical shutter any longer in this camera lens combination because the shutter, the mechanical shutter, is a leaf shutter that sits in the lens. Since we now have an M lens, which is a manual focusing lens anyway, we have no longer a mechanical shutter. So what we need to do in order to get a live view here, whenever I press halfway the shutter button, look at that, it says again, no lens detected. So in order to get a live view, we need to go to the menu and need to activate the electronic shutter, which is under exposure. If we go here, then all of a sudden we get a live view with some vignetting, of course, because the image circle of this particular Leica-M lens is not large enough to fully cover the 44x33mm sensor. But nevertheless, we can focus and I can make my point. I get this widest open and I need a minimum focusing distance of 0.7 meters. So let me move Jennifer a bit more in the background, just 1 second. Jennifer is now on a tripod and a bit more far away, so I don't violate the minimum focusing distance. And I also switched here in fully manual mode. I'm at the lowest ISO, which also is the base or native ISO of 50. And I need to stop down because the scene will otherwise get too bright. So let's say we go here to an f5.6. And now I should be able to focus. So first of all, you see focus peaking here, but I want also magnification. And now let's try to focus on Jennifer, that she's sharper in focus. This is no longer there. This is also too far. I think it's somewhere here. Let's take that shot and let's see how it looks like. Let's double tap. And you see Jennifer is sharper in focus. That looks actually good. Now, currently we are at an exposure time of 1/8 seconds, and I did shoot this handheld. Let's see if we can try our luck for the time being up to 1 second, but already at 1/8 seconds, you see that image stabilization is actually working. And it is absolutely essential that you have here the correct focal length. The in-body image stabilization always gets orientation from the focal length, and this is a 50mm lens, so make sure you dial it in here. Let's try our luck again. Let's go here for 1 second. Let's go here to 1 second, and let's try to do this handheld. And then I'm already satisfied. It will be much brighter now, the image. I stopped down, I think, to f11 just for demonstration purposes. It's still too bright, the scene, but doesn't play a role at this point in time. And let me do this handheld with electronic shutter, without any self-timer, without the camera on a tripod. Let's tap in. Yeah, this is still sharp and good and in focus. And that should prove to you that in-body image stabilization is working, but the crucial setting for this was the focal length in the stabilization section. Make sure you dial that in. That was tip number 16. Tip number 17 is about the distinction between B and T mode. And I want to quickly show you, first of all, how to make this visible, and second, what it really is. So let's go into the settings. Let's go here into exposure, and then we go to configuration. And under configuration, we find here show B and T mode. And let's activate this. And there are some constraints. ISO cannot be set to auto ISO, and auto exposure lock should also not be active, and we should be in single drive mode, which I think is the case here. And now if you go into the manual exposure setting, I'm now on fully manual mode, and we go here with the front control wheel and make exposure longer and longer and shutter speed slower and slower. And we come to 1 second, then the next setting is B, and B stands for bulb. And that means the following. I will demonstrate here now, but it will be shaky because I should actually use a remote cable release or the Focus Mobile 2 app. But I do it here just with my pointing finger. So what happens is I push the shutter release button down, and then it's counting and counting seconds. And as long as I don't lift that finger, it will take exposure and the image will be super overexposed in a moment. Then I release my finger and then exposure is done. And you see here, this is completely white because I exposed the sensor 13 seconds to light. And now the T mode, I will keep this very short, works in kind of the same way, but you can lift your finger. So when you first push down the shutter release button, you can lift your finger and the camera starts to take exposure, and it will stop taking exposure the moment in time you push shutter release button again. Tip number 18 is if you don't need B and T mode, then just switch it off. And it can be a bit confusing. Let's go back into manual mode here. Let's go here to M. And if you now operate the shutter speed or the exposure time, how you also gonna call it, and you cross the 1 second exposure, all of a sudden you stumble into bulb mode. You think, oh my gosh, that's end of story. The longest exposure without bulb mode is 1 second. But if you then cross T mode, you actually can start again to make your exposures longer and longer and your shutter speed slower and slower. But for some people, this might be annoying. If you have no use of bulb and T mode, then let's go back here into aperture priority, then just switch it off and go here into exposure, go to configuration, and down here you have show B and T mode deactivated. And if now we switch back, I should have left it in manual mode, into manual mode, then you know, if I come to 1 second, it will not show me B, it will not show me T. I can just go longer and longer. For some people, this will be the better option to making it go away completely, not having bulb and T mode showing up in exposure dialing and just continuing after 1 second to even longer exposures. Tip number 19 is not spectacular, but is important nevertheless. If you go and check your image quality, always make sure that in the image format, if you have RAW and something else, JPEG or HEIF, that in bit depth for RAW, you have 16-bit. Only that will give you the full information, the highest possible quality you can have on these RAW images. And if accidentally you dialed this to 14, then from time to time check if your quality settings for images are still matching your standards. My recommendation is leave this on 16-bit at all times. Tip number 20, and the last one for this particular session here, is actually a very interesting one, because in the same way as on the predecessors of the X2D Mark II, there is actually a hidden menu in the camera which you activate almost like in Android phones when you activate the so-called developer mode. And that is an interesting one. I always like that. So you go here to General and you go here to Service. And under service, you find all kinds of things. Let's go down here. The last section we have here is sensor calibration. And actually for this one, because I find it super important, I will actually post very soon a quick tip video where I show you how this works and what it does. But that's end of story, right? I cannot swipe further down. Sensor calibration is end of story. Now, if you do the following, if you tap repeatedly on camera firmware, it will no longer stop here at sensor calibration, but will show you a couple of additional options. Let's do it. And now we are done. You saw very quickly flashing a message here. And if we go now here, you see under sensor calibration, all of a sudden we have a new section. There is factory reset, which is very useful if you want to sell your camera, and it will completely wipe out everything that's ever been on that camera from you, all the traces. Then we can clear a sensor calibration, which we did before. And that might also be useful. And then we can also dial in a sensor calibration warning where the camera detects itself whether it needs a sensor calibration or not. And I think with this, I conclude my 20 tips and tricks. I hope you liked it. I think the last one is a spectacular one. It's pretty cool that there is a hidden menu here on that camera and that you get 3 additional functions here, which you have not been able to see before. Here under sensor calibration was end of story. And if you liked that video, don't forget to drop me your thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.